but it has been,
Stop watching Fox or CNN or whatever you watch all day. It's fake news. It's crazy. I won't even.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Brenzel. Thank you for joining us on the latest installment of TRD Talks Live. This is a weekly webinar series that we started to discuss the impact of the pandemic on the real estate industry. Today, we're going to be focusing on the construction space. I'm here today with Carlo Scissura. He's president and CEO of the New York Building Congress, as well as Brad Meltzer. He's president of Plaza Construction. Unfortunately, Luke Coletti couldn't make it today, but we're going to have a great discussion. But first, we're going to hear a message from our sponsor, Robert Scheer of Open Space. Robert, are you ready?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. Like Katie said, my name is Robert Scheer from Open Space. Really happy to support this webinar and learn what we can from the panelists, just like everyone else, as they share their insights. It's definitely a new world we're in, so interested to learn what they're going to say. This topic is really particularly relevant to us, given what Open Space does. Simply put, Open Space lets teams virtually visit their job sites anywhere, anytime. In fact, since shelter-in-place orders have gone into effect, we've seen a 50% increase in the usage as more and more teams rely on Open Space to keep projects, inspections, and bids moving. You can think of Open Space as sort of an up-to-date Google Street View of your job site. So even if you can't get to the site, you can see what's going on and track progress from home. The key is how we get those photos. All you need to do is attach a standard off-the-shelf 360 camera to your hard hat and literally walk the job site, just like you would normally. Our computer vision tech automatically pins every image taken twice a second to the floor plan, aligns them together, and hosts them in the cloud for review. And people seem to love it. In the past 18 months, our customers have captured over 800 million square feet of projects and were used by most of those GCs across the country. In New York City, we're on about a dozen projects right now, including the Spiral, where they've captured 20 walks in the last 30 days. So they're really using it pretty intensely. So enough talking. The best way to understand our system is to see it in action. So we've got a short video, about a minute, that we want to show you of this thing working. And if you want to learn more, please visit us at www.openspace.ai. Again, openspace.ai. And so thank you for your time, and let's watch the video.
Just a quick message to our viewers. If you are watching this program tonight and you value TRD's work, please support our journalism by signing up for a subscription to our website. Okay, so Carlo and Brad, let's get to it. You know, last month, the governor had announced that all non-essential construction sites would shut down. Essential construction being defined as infrastructure, healthcare facilities, affordable housing, and certain emergency construction. But I want to ask a more basic question, which is, I guess, why some forms of construction should be considered essential in the first place. Why don't we start with you, Brad?
Well, it's an interesting question. So our business operates in many parts of the country, and in some regions we're considered essential, and some other regions we're not, actually. So as an example, in New York City, as you know, as you just mentioned, we're shut down, but across the river, New Jersey, we're operating. So the definition of essential changes depending on where you might be. The basic premise is there's certain business that want to continue to keep moving. Obviously, if you're working on a hospital right now, that would be critically important to society, or if you're trying to get another school open, or things that the basic residential people in a community need to operate. But each governor has their own subjective view of what's essential and what's not, and we're trying to work within that in the different regions within which we operate.
Mm-hmm. And Carlo, do you agree with the state's classifications of what it considers essential versus non-essential?
Well, look, I think the industry worked very hard together
to get a large number of these categories placed under the essential line. I think the bottom line is you need infrastructure to continue to be built no matter what's going on. Obviously, you want to continue to build affordable housing because people will need housing to go to. Brad was right, you need hospitals right now. But I think the real question becomes, how do you just shut down a construction site? You know, it's not as simple as saying, oh, your office is going to the next 3 months, lock the door, and everyone's going to sit home and do these great Zoom chats, right? Construction sites take a little more planning, a little more integration. A lot of different parts of the trades have to be included. And then you can't just say, okay, site in the middle of Manhattan, we'll see you in 3 months. You know, there's still going to have to be people there watching, ensuring safety. We almost had a tornado last night, right? You need people to ensure that things are safe. So I think it's a very complex set of issues that go with shutting down construction. And that's really why we said essential needs to be a broader category than just, emergency. And I think, a couple of weeks ago, we heard there was a big water main break in Long Island. And I said, the last thing you want right now in New York City is a major water main break, where you will then need to get professionals and city workers leaving emergency services to go fix a hole in the ground. You don't want Con Edison work to stop, National Grid work to stop. There are things that have to continue to keep the city moving, even though we're going through a pause.
What can be done, though, to minimize the risk to the workers who are working on those sites? I guess, Brad, what has your company done to?
Well, we're obviously practicing standard social distancing, but then our job sites have specific social distancing regulations that we're implementing. And again, in various regions of the country, they change. As an example, in Miami Beach, they're requiring us to take everybody's temperature before they enter the job site. And, depending on how many people you have working on a job site, just queuing up in the morning and setting up a line that's 6 feet apart to get people in and out of the job makes it more complicated. But we're following all the practical procedures, masks, gloves, etc. And then every so often when there is a requirement where 2 people have to hold something that's heavy or things like that, we're trying to mitigate all those things by using equipment rather than people power so that you can still keep people apart. Another example is a hoist, a buck hoist, to take people up and down in a building. We're only putting so many people into a buck hoist at the same time. Again, that slows down productivity, but are all the things we need to do to maintain a safe environment.
And I think what Brad is saying, we're seeing really across the industry. And I would add one thing, the construction industry already happens to be one of the most regulated, safety concerned industries out there. There's been a bunch of safety bills in the New York City Council in the last few years. DOB has really increased their safety patrols and inspectors going out there. So I think we already start ahead of the game in safety. Now you add all the things that Brad spoke about, including, by the way, the temperature testing, which has become a very integral part of at least many job sites that I'm being told about.
Right. Carlo's point is interesting. Think about it. Our people are already used to wearing certain safety gear as part of their daily routine.
Absolutely.
So now it's something additional. Whereas if you were just an average person working in an office building, you don't think like that. You go to work every day, you show up with your briefcase and your lunch, and you go to work. Our people are prepared to put on a uniform each day, and now it's a couple of different components of that uniform that they need to add.
Right, and they're already most times wearing a mask. They're wearing protective eye gear. They're wearing gloves. So again, this industry once again is ahead. Opinion.
Have you seen any drop off in the number of workers who have reported to sites? I know that was something that I've heard from other people that there has been a pretty deep percentage drop in workers showing up even at essential sites. Is this something
we've seen various workplace changes in people power. We don't call it manpower. We call it people power at Plaza. As an example, we're doing a large project in Tampa, and Disney shut down all of their work in Orlando. Well, that is a 1 hour travel. That fed an increase actually in our workforce in Tampa. We're seeing the same thing in New Jersey. We're able to maintain manpower levels in New Jersey. So it's varied across the board, but we have seen a productivity drop. So let's face it, it's harder to get people in and out of a building, and when you have to maintain a certain distance, it's much more complicated. We're doing a lot of multifamily work, and only so many people can go into a condominium or apartment unit and do finishes or trim out if you're in one apartment and you have to stay 6 feet apart. It's not like you can put 12 people into that unit now and get it finished. So there are obstacles, but I will tell you, it's been incredible to see how people can come together and cooperate under these circumstances, all the way down from our clients, down to the manpower and people power on a project. Everybody is clearly understanding it's a trying time, and I think at all levels, it's been amazing to see people come together and support each other.
And Carlo, you had mentioned before that it's not like you can just shut down a construction site immediately. I was wondering, are there any sort of unforeseen, consequences or issues that arise when you leave a construction site empty for a prolonged period of time?
Well, look, I think obviously, there are still bad apples out there. So there is still vandalism. There are still people that will try and take advantage of situations. So the last thing we want is for a job site that is vacant to become not a good place to be. So I think that's number one. The other thing is keeping job sites empty, particularly if you are in an area where there are residential buildings or homes, extends the lifeline of how long it's going to take to finish that project. So now when we restart, you're going to have neighbors start complaining, why is it taking so long? So I think it's, just shutting down has really a long-term effect on not only the job site, but on the community. So I think that's why the governor and the ESD were smart to really be clear that there are certain things that should continue to go on and that you don't want to stop. The other thing I would add, there are projects across the city, like One Vanderbilt is a great example, that yes, it may be a commercial building, may not seem essential, but part of their work is building a public plaza, building additional entrances and exits to Grand Central Station, underground infrastructure work, and have that in other projects across the city. So you can't just shut down a project like that, because now you're affecting people in Grand Central, people who are walking. So sites like that, you really want to see them continue to be open and to be built.
Yeah.
In your different markets, Brad, I guess we'll start with New York, but there have been a number of developers who, even if they have projects that are considered essential, have decided to shut down construction anyway. Has that been something you've encountered either in New York or your other markets?
Well, the projects that we're currently working on in New York are all shut down, with the exception of one smaller project. But in our other markets, we've got one project here in Florida. It was a retail project that the developer decided to put on hold, not to cancel it. And then we've seen some other, various stoppages in other regions as well. But most of the projects are continuing to move ahead. There have been some issues with material deliveries as well. As an example, we had a project in Maryland where our windows were being supplied overseas. That overseas facility was shut down because they had the COVID-19 before we did. Now those windows are coming, and another project down the block actually has its windows coming from Queens, and it's considered local, but now that's shut down. one of our clients is experiencing that impact on a project that we're not involved in. So again, it's a mixed bag, and each of these projects has their disparate, situations that each needs to be managed differently.
You had mentioned the difficulty in getting certain supplies. I know when all this started, there had been a rush to get, masks and protective gear. Is there any trouble getting those supplies now for workers on sites throughout your markets?
We've been super fortunate. All of our projects, it was a mad scramble right away to get these different materials, all the PPE, but we've been super fortunate on our projects, and we've leveraged relationships with our partners, our subcontractors. We're helping them, they're helping us, and even some of our local competition. I mean, it's another example. I've been on the phone with some of our competitors just discussing how can we help each other? How can we support each other through times like this? It reminds me of when, you have a hurricane in Florida or you have flooding in, like Sandy in New York. A lot of different people, even when you're competing with people, during these times, they come together.
And then, look, Brad, you're right. This industry has a very clear track record of coming together in two very distinct ways. One is exactly what you said, which is helping people and really helping people connect. But the other part is that it's this industry that, whether it was after the Great Depression, World War II, post 9/11, post Sandy, it's the building and construction industry that really leads the city and the country in getting people back to work and getting everybody up and running. So I think when you look at an industry that is uniquely positioned, both today and for the future, I think you look at the New York construction industry.
Now, I know there's been some clarification over the past few weeks over what's considered affordable housing in New York specifically under the essential construction order. There had been some conflicting guidance given out by the Department of Buildings that said projects with at least 30% of their units income restricted, that was affordable housing, whereas the state was saying 20%. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why there was this confusion and sort of what that says about the coordination between the state and the city.
I haven't seen any. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Carlo. Go ahead.
No, please, Brad. Go ahead.
We're currently in New York City actually not working on any affordable housing projects, so I personally haven't been that focused on that nuance. I have heard that there's been some complications, and I know, again, when someone comes up with a rule and it's a new rule, there's always different layers or nuances rules that have to be ferreted out. And I think, the government's working closely with development interests to try to figure that out right now.
Yeah, I think, look, we are, most people in this industry are talking to people at the city, state, and federal level all the time. I think the most important thing is that we were able to include affordable housing as essential, 20%, 30%. It doesn't affect many projects. The projects that it did affect, I think the city is taking it on a case-by-case basis and looking at each one individually to see what works best.
Brad, you had mentioned that you have work in New Jersey that's ongoing while the work in New York is shut down. And I'm wondering if the difference in policies creates any, difficulties for you as a company or any, unique challenges.
I think, again, it's bringing us as a company closer together. So we operate in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, the Mid-Atlantic region, Florida, both Miami and Central Florida, San Jose, California, Los Angeles. And every day we have a team meeting. We use Teams as our Microsoft 365 as our platform. And what's also amazing, it used to be more difficult to get people to a meeting. And now we're meeting constantly, and we're meeting what feels like face-to-face. It's become the norm. My COO sits in New York. I sit in Miami. Our CEO sits in New York. Our people are all over the country. And we are constantly discussing the different things we're seeing in our regions. Is it more complicated? Absolutely. But it's manageable, and it just takes focus.
Now, I know the governor and the regional task force that was launched last week, they're trying to figure out how to restart things. What can we expect once construction sites are active again, just in terms of, demand for labor or demand for materials? How much longer are these projects going to take now that they've been shut down for, over a month?
I think you're going to see a number of different issues, right? First, to Carlo's point earlier, just like when you shut a job down, you don't just flick the switch and turn a job back on. You need to get all your critical subcontractors back to the job site. Everybody kind of needs to remember exactly where they were when they left off, especially if it's a 4, 6, or 8 week duration, and to kind of get a cadence back to a project. At Plaza, one of the things we always focus on is a rhythm, a cadence, a flow to a construction project, and the jobs will have lost that. So that'll be really critical that the field personnel and the project management personnel kind of band together to do that and get a schedule back up and running. And also to make sure, to the point earlier, our supplies readily available that we needed to hit those projects. So there'll be an initial kind of startup time to get back and running. But I think for the most part, people are going to be eager to get back to work, the ones that haven't been able to. So there'll be kind of a new appreciation for coming to work every day. And I think people will be very eager to get started.
Right. I agree. I think the most critical thing that government can do is give us a timeline. Because once we get a timeline and we know whether it's the middle of May, the end of May, that things will begin to reopen on construction sites, then people like Brad and his colleagues and competitors can start planning, can get back to getting people on schedule and on sites. And I think, I think people will be pleasantly surprised, at least I could say in New York from what I'm hearing, that companies and sites are ready to go. A lot of people are really ready to go back to work, the contractors. By the way, the design world has been continuing to work, right? Architects, engineers, they are continuing to do their planning. And I think it's important when we talk about the building industry, it's obviously not just contractors. It's contractors, architects, engineers, subcontractors. You get it. It's really everybody in its entirety. I think where we will need help is to encourage city government and state government get their projects on track. So, for example, we need school construction to begin immediately. That is in critical need for New York City. We need DOT to get back to building roads and fixing highways and doing what they do. And it really goes for a lot of agencies. On the state level, state university campuses, we want to get those projects back and running. So I think it's going to take a coordinated effort. But, look, is it longer than we had hoped? Yes. Is it going to be a year? No. So that's a good thing. And I think that the other good positive thing is that once we reopen, the weather will be good. So people can be out working, jobs can continue. And look, we're all going to have to come together and look at how do we set up sites differently? How do we look at construction in New York now under the lens of what happened and what may happen? So it's an opportunity to think a little out of the box, which is exciting.
Is that going to mean, I guess, extending expectations for project timelines? If you have fewer people on a site, it's difficult to be socially distant from another construction worker, especially when you're doing something that's very collaborative. I'm just wondering if there's going to have to be a culture.
I think absolutely. Absolutely. So obviously, if you're in a market right now, like New York City, where the job shut down, it's essentially day for day, right? That duration is clear. The unclear component is when we restart, how much time does it take you to get restarted? How much productivity do you lose simply because people have to practice social distancing? And I think all those things are going to have to be factored in. Every single job will be slightly different, especially if you're building a tower as opposed to an interiors project. Those are going to have different delays or obstructions.
And look, I think I agree, and this is a time where all of us in the industry will need to look at best practices in other places. How are we using technology better? By the way, I said this today to someone else. New York is a 24-hour city, we say. Why do we have to be a 7 or 8 hour construction city? There are places in New York where you could do construction 24 hours a day. And I think we need to start having serious conversations about how do we do shift work? How do we say, instead of everybody on from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., well, some will be on from 7 to 3, some from 3 to 10, some, you get it, right? Staggered shifts. But, and you know, when you do that, you not only get projects back on their schedule and on time and everything, you create jobs. You also help the local deli, the pizzeria, the restaurant, all of the supporting characters who are suffering immensely because of the lack of construction workers on a site. Now, all of a sudden, you could say, wow, we're going to be quick in getting New York's economy back. Miami should be doing the same thing. By the way, Brad, I happen to love Miami. So I'm gonna come there again soon, I hope. But you get Chicago, LA. This is a national conversation about how do we look at construction differently? How do we take this unique time and use it for innovative ideas, creative ideas, best practices that are happening in other places. So in a way, the blessing of this is we get to think unique, and that's exciting for this industry.
Now, as part of the state budget, the governor had included a measure that expands prevailing wage requirements, essentially union level wages in the state. Do you think that this was the right move? I know there had been some opposition to this, prior to the pandemic starting, but especially given the current crisis, some felt that this was the wrong time to do this. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll let Carlo touch that one.
You're so kind. Look, I think I could give you an argument on both sides, right? I understand it, and I understand what it means. I also understand that there are going to be projects that will have a very tough time continuing because of that. But honestly, right now, it's going to be a wait and see. Let's see what happens. Let's not say no right away. Let's give it a chance to work. And I think we'll be able to have a better conversation about the impact of prevailing wage, if any, right? Maybe at the end of the day, the opponents were wrong, or maybe the opponents were right. But I think it'll take a few months before we can truly understand what it means. I think before we talk about that, we need to talk about getting sites open, getting people back to work, mobilizing our resources, working with labor, and really coming together to rebuild. And I think that's, to me, the most critical thing right now.
Yeah. Carlo raised a point earlier about some kind of advance notice, right? We're all kind of sitting on the edge of our seat, wondering when. But it's really important that as much advance notice an industry can receive, we can all plan better, and we could start to notify our staffs, whether you're at the contractor level, the subcontractor, the vendors, the suppliers, all the way down the food chain, because we talked even about materials before. If you have materials that are supposed to come to your project and they're coming from Georgia, well, we need to let Georgia know that we're ready for those materials soon. Otherwise, they got to stay in the warehouse in Georgia until they're ready. Otherwise, they get put on a truck and there's nowhere for them to go. So there's a lot of communication that needs to take place before we get back to business. And I know it's very sensitive at the mayor and the governor levels, but the more notice we can all receive, the much better we'll all be off.
Agreed.
Do you think construction workers should be eligible for federal hazard pay? I know that's something the governor has called for that for frontline workers, and there was a city council bill that was proposed today that mandates bonuses for essential workers. I'm just curious if that's something that construction workers should be able to tap into.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't know where the government's going to fall on that. I know that our people have done yeoman's work in our different markets, keeping the job sites safe and open. And I've always thought that construction workers in general were the unsung heroes of our country. They might not be out there every day saving lives, but they are creating an environment for all of us to live in every day. And all of us have to go in and out of construction sites and use the buildings that we build, and we want them to all be safe. So I think, they're kind of an unheralded group of people.
Agreed.
And Carlo, you had mentioned earlier that there's, workers have had to undergo additional construction safety training. I was wondering if you heard anything about the timeline for meeting the requirements of Local Law 196, if the pandemic has impacted that at all. I think it's by September 2020, 40 extra hours, and then 62 hours for supervisors.
Right. I think, look, DOB will need to make some decisions in the very near future. And I think we'll know more in the coming weeks about that. I think everything's on the table right now.
Gotcha. And I guess just outside the coronavirus response, are there any construction-related legislative initiatives at the city and state level that you'd like to see pursued over the next, I know it's hard because we're in this now, but I guess, in the next year?
Well, look, my big push is going to be in Washington. And it's going to be very simple. At a time of great crisis in America, whether it was the Great Depression or World War II, or the 2008 economic collapse, what we did to rebuild America and our economy is rebuild America, is a grand infrastructure plan. And I think we've now heard everybody say it's something they want to see. We heard it with the president. We heard it from Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer. Everyone's been talking about rebuilding an infrastructure. Well, I cannot think of a better moment in our history when we shouldn't spend trillions of dollars to rebuild America. You would create hundreds of thousands of jobs. You would create an economic boom that we haven't seen in a long time. And I think you would really refocus the energy of the conversation on how are you spending federal money. And I think interest rates are basically nothing right now. The private sector would jump in immediately. You could sell bonds. And you know what? 10 years from now, we'll be looking at a country with new railways, a new Second Avenue subway, new airports, fully funded bridges, tunnels, green economy, green jobs, high-speed broadband, water and sewer, ports, et cetera. I think that's really the conversation we all should come together with. Federal government, we get it, spend money, give money to states and localities, let us rebuild our country.
We agree, and we think that's going to be a necessity because we're not really sure what the lending market's going to be like in the near future, how many projects will be privately financed. And I think, government's going to need to step in to spur that economy and kind of kickstart that private development, to Carlo's point.
Have you seen any changes to financing on your end yet? I guess just in terms of,
I think it's a little too early to tell. We have a bunch of projects that were in the final stages, loans about to be closed. Some of those got put off a little bit. Most of our clients are still very positive about their projects. The question is, will the lenders still feel the same way, in a month from now as they did 2 months ago about the same projects? And, we're cautiously optimistic, but we have seen some of our projects kind of get put into a pause until the dust settles and the clients can understand, what's their next move.
And look, I think if the federal government in their Stimulus 4 package, which they're already starting to talk about, really focuses on rebuilding an infrastructure, I think you will see lenders jumping at the chance to fund some of those projects.
Do you think this experience, this is actually a question that one of our viewers asked, do you think this experience is going to lead to, a greater reliance on new technologies in construction? It's just softwares that enable you to do more off-site work, preparation work. Just curious if this could lead to a change on that front as well.
I think in two specific areas, most certainly. I think, first of all, the day of hopping on a plane and flying to a certain city just for a one-day meeting with all the architects and engineers in a room to collaborate, you'll still have those, but I think you start to see this platform that we're on right now and other platforms like this being used much more, and I think it will actually expedite a lot of the upfront work, design work, collaboration that we used to see have to happen more manually. I will tell you that the municipalities that we work with around the country have been very creative on inspection process, as an example. So we're seeing a lot of, I'm going to call it Zoom inspections for lack of a more technical term, but we're using platforms like Open Space, like Multivista and other things like that. And the municipalities are working with us on that. They couldn't get to every job site in some cases, and they understand what we're going through. And I think, once you break that barrier, you'll start to see things that can happen like that going forward in the future.
Okay. I guess if we could take a couple seconds to talk a little bit about the biggest lessons that the industry has learned from all this, or the biggest takeaways. Carlo, if you want to start.
Yeah, look, my takeaway, I think I've said this throughout the conversation, is this industry has a couple of things that are unique to it. First of all, we already start out by being one of the safest industries and most safety regulated industries that are out there. So that will allow construction to continue as it's happening now that we're seeing, and to open up immediately once the governor says we're ready to go. And I think the other thing is, when you look at history, particularly in New York City, it's been the construction industry, the building industry, that has been the one to reopen our economy. And I think this time will be no different. When you get construction and design and real estate together, I think you've got a very powerful message to New Yorkers. We had put out a study a few months ago. When you look at who works in construction, 76% of the 300,000 plus people working in construction, the 5 boroughs of New York, most of them in 4 boroughs, not including Manhattan. 62% are non-white. So I think you're looking at the middle class of New York that needs to come back and will come back stronger than ever once the doors open up again. And we're excited about that. We know there will be some challenges, but we'll come back to it. And Brad, I will just disagree with you a little bit on only one thing. This is fun, Zoom, it's okay, but I'm excited about getting back to seeing people in person and having a drink with somebody and actually enjoying a meeting now and then. So I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. I'll tell you, for us, the lessons that we learned, first we learned, more about our people than we ever learned before. We had to make some very difficult decisions when work stopped. I got an email from one of my staff members that said, can you revert me back to my old salary if it means it will help the company or help other people? Those are the kind of stories that you don't hear all the time. And you get these heartwarming text message or emails from your staff. I think, the resiliency of our people, the nimbleness to literally go from a Friday one afternoon to a Monday morning trying to do business as usual, whatever that means in today's world, and everybody not complaining about it and understanding how to do their job and, kind of rally together. The lessons learned for me are about people and how when a world kind of shuts down, how we can keep moving forward. And the other thing we've learned is, construction has been a very regionalized business for a long, long time. And this is probably the first time, at least that I can remember, I've been doing this now for almost 30 years, that the entire industry across the entire United States are all experiencing the same problems. So to Carl's point earlier about best practices, we can all share best practices, and I'm sure a lot of the things that we're all learning are going to become part of the new norm. So we might as well band together and help each other and learn and make sure that the best practices are based upon actual discussion and conversation. And now we have a chance to support government when they come out with new regulations, because they're going to be leaning on us rather than the other way around.
Agreed.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time today. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us. Be sure to tune in Friday for our next TRD Talks Live. We're going to be featuring brokers from the Hamptons and talking to them about what they're seeing there. Thank you very much.